Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this special National Pain Week 2023 edition of the Mr. Pain Live podcast. I'm your host, Brent Headley, and I'm coming to you from Whadjuk Noongar country. Before we get started, Chronic Pain Australia wishes to acknowledge the over 65,000 years of continuous care and custodianship by First Nations people for the beautiful waters and lands in which we currently stand and meet today. Their sovereignty has never been ceded, and we pay respects to elders past and present and emerging, and we commit ourselves as allies. So to set the scene, Chronic Pain Australia is the national voice for the 3.6 million Australians who live with chronic pain. And as part of National Pain Week for 2023, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to our community of chronic pain warriors and carers who are joining us for this online event, as well as those who are accessing this event in the form of its recording. Today's discussion centres on themes that are deeply personal for many. The results captured from Chronic Pain Australia's National Pain Survey present a powerful and equally concerning picture of the impact of chronic pain on our nation. CPA is committed to addressing these themes head on, and in doing so, better understand the experiences and the challenges faced by our chronic pain community. So to this point, while our aim of this discussion is to spread the message of validation, hope and support, we intend to discuss some very heavy topics that include suicide ideation, self-harm, drug and alcohol use. So for some, we understand and we do appreciate that this can be triggering. And if this is you, we encourage you to reach out to the support networks or professional support organisations such as Beyond Blue, Lifeline and PainLink. It's also worth noting that PainLink is a phone line run by people who live with chronic pain, and they can be accessed via 1300 340 357. So before we introduce and we hear from today's fantastic panel, it's important to first frame this discussion by sharing some of the key findings of the 2023 National Pain Survey. We had over 3,000 Australian patients and carers who live with chronic pain respond to this year's survey, and it does illustrate a fairly vicious cycle of chronic pain. The results point to a pretty concerning trend. So to begin with, living with chronic pain does have a significant impact on mental health. Nearly 8 in 10 respondents said that they had mental health issues, and half of the respondents said that they'd thought of taking their own life. The data also tells us that themes such as insomnia, inactivity, and poor mental health are both caused by chronic pain and contribute to worsening the condition. And this is obviously driving increased levels of suicide ideation. Some respondents living with chronic pain also describe their experience accessing healthcare as characterised as feeling treated like a drug addict, not listened to, or like they're imagining their pain. And the cost of medical treatments and medications to manage chronic pain is also forcing patients to neglect other healthcare checks in order to treat their existing conditions. So these challenges people are facing are being compounded by a lack of access to healthcare and government regulations for opioid prescribing. And this is leaving patients experiencing changes in the way they manage their existing pain. Survey reveals that without access to patient-centred care, people are living with chronic pain are forced to give up important health-promoting activities for physical and mental health. And we understand if left under-addressed, this is obviously a risk to a lifetime of disability that many Australians with pain are facing. So, as referenced earlier, this is very much a vicious cycle, and will make the condition much, much worse for many more millions of Australians who live day to day with chronic pain. Before I hand over to our panelists, it's worth quickly touching on the relationship between mental health of Australian men who manage chronic or persistent pain. And for this year's survey, we worked really, really hard to increase the number of respondents, almost doubling the number of men who partook in the survey itself. Unfortunately, their insights are also a tale of distressing impact of chronic pain, especially in the areas around self-identity and psychological well-being. So, at this point, it is a very appropriate time to introduce our first panelist, Piero Roberto. Piero, thanks for joining us today. You've experienced a particularly challenging journey managing chronic pain, which we understand began around the time you underwent back surgery in 2014. For the audience, can you share with us how you've personally navigated and continue to navigate the challenges of managing chronic pain? think you might be on mute, Piero. We might have to have another start of that.
Here we go. Apologies. Well, great way to kick it off. Thanks very much, Brett, and thanks for giving me an opportunity to speak about my struggles with chronic pain. I suppose my story is not a highlight of my life, but hopefully my message with chronic pain and the addictions that come with it can potentially help others if they're sort of in that situation. But yeah, my name is Piero, and I'm here today to tell my story on chronic pain and the addictions to painkillers, alcohol, and illicit drugs. I've had 2 back surgeries. My last was in 2014. It was deemed failed surgery, and basically I've lived with chronic pain since then. It's been tough. I had an awesome job as a construction manager for a telecommunication organisation. Last year in January, I had to make the call. I struggled to fulfil my role and responsibilities dealing with chronic pain, high pressure job, and the effects of painkillers. That sort of took its toll after a few years, and made the call to just stop and sort of try and focus on myself and my rehabilitation. That probably wasn't a great choice to a certain degree, because once I stopped work, I was here at home and lonely in a sense, and the spiral started. An identity crisis kicked in. Who am I today? Had a lot of time on my hands, and confidence just went straight out the window. And from there, taking painkillers as I should be taking them, once, twice a day, I ended up taking them like lollies. And the sad thing about it, and I hope my mum's not listening to this podcast, but I started stealing her painkillers, her sleeping tablets. I'd ask friends, family members if they had any painkillers lying around, and I'd be taking them like lollies, like I said. And from there, the spiral started. Very clouded. You start to lose your identity. You just don't know who you are anymore. And the reality was that wasn't enough either. I mean, because I slowly got immune to all the painkillers, and I loved to drink on a weekend, but all of a sudden I found myself drinking from Monday to Sunday, and it was a deadly cocktail. There's no doubt about it. It was a deadly cocktail that I started to spiral, and I started to take my family with me, and it was sad. And to see my daughter cry and watch me in that state of mind and see what's happened to her father was absolutely heartbreaking. And I got myself into this mess, and it was just so hard to try and get out of it. And the pains and struggles that came with it, all of a sudden, that terrible word that we don't like to talk about is suicide. But there was moments there that I sat there and I thought, where am I and where's my life going? Am I any use to my family anymore? I mean, there was a stage there. I had a great job, making great money. We had a great lifestyle, travelled, loved my Harley Davidson's riding, loved the gym culture, and everything sort of came to a grinding halt. And all of a sudden, my existence got questioned within myself, and I started tormenting myself that I just wasn't good enough and my life was done. And these thoughts of suicide would cross my mind, and all of a sudden I'm waking up every day with these thoughts. And, I shake now talking about it. And I can remember getting out of bed, at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm thinking, I just want to go back to bed. Hurry up for 7:30 to come. I just want to go back to bed. I didn't want to be awake anymore. Facing the day was just a massive challenge, and it got tough. And, it's something I don't wish upon anybody. I really do. And I was fortunate enough from there that my insurance company gave me a call, and they spoke to me about a program that they had called Beyond Pain. And sort of with that program, I said, yes, I definitely would like to have a crack at this program. I need help. I'm in trouble here. And with that program, Beyond Pain, they gave me access to health and recovery specialists. They gave me access to a clinical pharmacist like the beautiful Nicolette, a psychologist, and with their support, and this great program, which is run by Angelo, the director, this program was probably the start of me climbing out of this hole, a dark hole. If you ever get a chance, Beyond Pain, it is an incredible read. Anyone who suffers from chronic pain, please read the book Beyond Pain, because you just relate to it so much. And Angelo just talks so much sense in that book. But I think from there, I started to learn and realise this is my life. Chronic pain is my life. I've got to find a way to deal with it. And with the support of those sort of people, like I said, the book, I started to implement sort of some good structures and strategies and goals each day to try and save myself and try and stop abusing the medications, the painkillers, and stop drinking. And I had to eliminate the bad habits and start to introduce good habits, Brent. And it wasn't easy to do. I mean, trying to wean off painkillers and alcohol, nights in bed, curled up in a ball with the anxiety that was shooting through me. It was tough and it was painful. But I had to continue to achieve the goals that I set to break away and, take medication only when required, have a drink, when on a weekend, and I had to break away from that path of destruction. So by implementing some good habits and creating some goals and strategies, I slowly sort of started to find myself, I started to see the light again. And again, very grateful for all those people that helped me and supported me, my GP, Beyond Pain, and my family and friends. They seen the pain that I was sort of going through, and they seen me change as an individual, and to have their support and to talk to people about the struggles that I had was very was therapeutic to me and very helpful to me. So at the end of the day, I just had to continue to fight and find myself out. The struggles don't go, Brent. The struggles continue to challenge you. I mean, your setbacks come your way, flare-ups. You're always thinking of that the opioids, you're always thinking of the alcohol. But, and I've had a couple of lapses along the journey. I mean, I'm not going to lie about that, and I get disappointed about that. But again, by having goals and strategies in place, I keep going back to them, and they keep getting me back into line and going down the path of good again. So, look, dealing with chronic pain has its challenges and its struggles, and it's always going to be there. But we've just got to make sure that we stick to a process and continue to challenge it and fight it and try and beat it. So, look, that's my message today. I hope it helps others to try and avoid that path of painkillers and alcohol and illicit drugs, and because it really does take you to a dark place, and it's a place I do not wish upon anybody. So, yeah, that's my story. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, Brent, to voice it. Thank you.
Thank you, Piero. I know that's the first time you've publicly shared that story in a format like this, and we are just indebted to you in terms of your ability to be able to share that. I know you're a little bit nervous coming in today. It's a bit of a pain-inducing sort of process, perhaps. But yeah, as I said, we're just incredibly appreciative for what you shared there. It's clear that pain as chronic pain has had an impact at really, I guess, sort of all across all aspects of your life. And you've mentioned Angelo and the work that and the support that he's been able to provide through Beyond Pain. It's probably a good opportunity for us to throw to Angelo, who's actually one of our panelists here today. So Angelo Ratnachandra is not only a past guest of this pod and someone with an incredible personal chronic pain story himself, but he's also the senior physiotherapist and a counsellor with over 20 years experience in chronic illness recovery and wellbeing. Ange is the founder of Beyond Pain, and he's also a Chronic Pain Australia board member. And as Piero highlighted, using alcohol to treat chronic pain is clearly a common and all too prevalent practice for a lot of the chronic pain community. Many also say they feel stigmatized as a drug addict from healthcare. We're just really interested in this theme around addiction and dependence. Words that are thrown around, but it's important to unpack these differences. Can you shed some light on this for us?
Thanks, Brent. And Piero, thanks so much for your kind words. And look, it's an incredible journey you've gone through. And I'd just like to also highlight from what you said before I answer your question, Brent, that, your story might prevent someone from getting into the space that you're in, but also it might actually give someone hope who's already in that space that there is light at the end of the tunnel, because you're a true example of that you can do it despite the struggle. So well done, mate.
Thank you. Thank you.
In answering your question, Brent, yeah, there is a difference between addiction and dependence, and the words get thrown around. And I think the biggest issue is that as health practitioners, unless you're working in that area, there's very little continuous professional development on identifying that, and there's little funding for that. You go and ask your average allied health professional who works in the community, what is the difference between addiction and dependence? And they wouldn't know that. They wouldn't know the difference. They just know the term addict or addiction. And it is a dirty term, but we like at Beyond Pain to use more the terms around helpful versus unhelpful habits, because ultimately for us, an addiction is a habit that's out of control. And so in terms of defining the difference between addiction and dependence, addiction is really a habit that is out of control, that you're not necessarily needing to cope with something, whereas a dependence is where you might be taking your medication appropriately, but there's a dependence on that medication for you to function well. Whereas an addiction is more like a need or a driver, irrespective of how well you're going. That's in addition to your day-to-day functioning. And look, Nick will probably unpack that further, and she's probably in a better place to unpack that in more detail. But for us to keep it simple, that's how we look at it. We look at addiction not necessarily as a dirty word, but maybe an analogy for an unhelpful habit or a habit that's out of control versus, say, something like a dependence, which is probably a habit that's needed for you to function and control. I think
I'm on mute this time. Look, just to go back on Piero's story a little bit, what he described there was an interrelationship between his pain, alcohol, and I guess sort of substance use. Can you describe this interrelationship for us in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. If you have a look at the area of the brain that deals with habits, and I guess then leading on to addiction and dependence, I am simplifying this just for the purpose of this. There's three main areas. There's what we call the ventral tegmental area. There's the nucleus accumbens and the prefrontal cortex. And so the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens, they're a lot to do with also emotional states and drivers. So if you think about a habit is something that develops, a behavior that develops because there's a driver that's driving that behavior, right? You walk past the kitchen, you see a piece of cake, you eat it, it feels good. Next time you walk past the kitchen, you look for the piece of cake because it makes you feel good, and you keep going like that. So there has to be a driver. And so if you then look at mental health, our brains are wired to make us feel good, ideally. If there's pain, which is a sign of not feeling good or danger, our brains try and put in place strategies to get rid of the pain because it's an unpleasant experience. So then there's a driver to make it pleasant. There's got to be something that makes it pleasant. So, and we know that emotional state of being depressed and then wanting to feel good also works in those areas of the VTA and the nucleus accumbens and the prefrontal cortex. And then if you look at a functional MRI of a brain of a person that has chronic pain, you have areas in that area that lights up as well. So we have an interplay between habits, addictive behaviors or substance use disorders or just unhelpful habits, as well as pain, all in the same area of the brain. So it's all interlinked. It's very rare that you can just address one and then have to address another and then address another, which is the problem, because that's exactly what the typical allied health professional will do. They'd segregate. Oh, I'm here to help you with your pain. Oh, for your addiction, you might need to go somewhere else. Or for this, you'll have to go somewhere else. For depression, you have to go to this other place. And it just doesn't work. You are a person. You're not just your condition. And so we have to use a holistic approach.
Well, that's a good segue into my next question, the holistic approach, because Piero touched on, as part of his recovery, landing with yourself and your team, and the incredible support that you guys have provided. Perhaps we've got viewers out here today who are wondering what aspects they should be looking for when deciding upon, a quality practitioner to guide their own recovery. Do you have any advice to share with the audience?
Yeah, sure. I must put a special mention out, Piero, to Brent Weeks, who predominantly worked with you. So he's an incredible human being.
Absolute champion. Love him. Him.
He's the one that worked with Piero predominantly. But yes, in terms of practitioners, I think what we need to look at, or what I would encourage you to see, is that how confident is your practitioner in addressing not just your pain, but also if you do have a dependence or an addiction, how confident are they in approaching that? You need a practitioner. They don't have to be the expert in that, but have the confidence that, yes, I appreciate you've got this condition. Yes, that's okay. What we can do is we can try and work with this and then help liaise or work with this other mob that might be able to help you more in detail, but I'm still going to be in it. I'm just not going to pigeonhole myself into just working on pain, and I'm going to give a blind eye to that. So I think being open and honest with your treaters and saying, look, I also got this issue and I think it's interplaying, and seeing what their response is. If they're confident in saying, that's okay, we can deal with it. We might not be the best person, but we'll work with the other people so that you have a collaborative, multidisciplinary or an interdisciplinary approach to care, then that's what you're looking for. And by no means is Beyond Pain the only organization that can offer that sort of service. There's plenty of other organizations and plenty of other practitioners who's got those skill sets outside of Beyond Pain. And I just encourage, don't hold back, because ultimately your well-being and your health is the most important, and it's not any judgment on a allied health professional if you think they're not the right fit for you. It just means they're not the right fit for you. So I guess the simplest answer is ask the questions to see how they can manage you as a person, not just your painful body part, and then see if you're happy with that response.
Terrific. I just note there's a few questions coming through on the chat line at the moment. And for those that are out there listening and perhaps have a question to ask, we've certainly got some opportunities at the back end of this discussion to address those. So please keep the questions coming in true Q&A style. Thanks very much, Angelo. We'll just turn our attention a little bit now to another theme. We really do appreciate the diverse geographical regions that our community represent. So we'd like to discuss the experiences and especially the barriers to healthcare access for people living with chronic pain in rural and remote areas across the nation. So I guess sort of for context, over half of the respondents in this year's survey living in rural or remote areas cited their location as an issue that prevented them from accessing health professional services, specialists for their chronic pain, which is why we're throwing to Elizabeth Warboys, who is a pain project officer here at Chronic Pain Australia, lived with a strong lived experience of chronic pain, but lives in regional New South Wales. So Elizabeth, welcome to the discussion. Just maybe just off the top, could you shed a little bit of personal light on your chronic pain experience and the unique challenges faced by not only yourself, but also those living in regional areas?
Sure, Brent. Pleased to be here. And yes, I'm a born and bred country girl, so I've known rural life for all of my life. I won't say how many years that has been, but for the majority of my life, I've experienced chronic pain in one form or another. It started with endometriosis some 30 odd years ago, and over that time, I tried many different therapies because, as we all know, therapies change, things come in vogue. So we try them and then we move on to the next one. And as I was getting on top of my endometriosis pain with a multidisciplinary approach, but I have to say most of the treatments had up until that point been the use of opioids and nothing else. And just as I was getting on top of that, I then injured my back at work. So that's 3 years ago. And it has set me back on my pain journey and introduced some symptoms and experiences that I'd had before, but also introduced different issues and that for me. And one of the big issues I've had to cope with and I'm still trying to cope with is the workers' compensation and, recognition of an injury. So it's an added battle, you could say, battle to dealing with chronic pain. But I think for, recognising for those of us in rural and remote areas, and please, can I just acknowledge, I know there are limited health professionals across the nation in cities and regional locations to help people. So I know that you do experience similar issues, but the further you get away from health services, the more difficult it is to access them. And, as the media has highlighted, there's limited health professions, limited doctors, especially in rural areas. And where I live, we've had only 2 practices with limited doctors. So people have found that they've had to go looking in other towns, 50, 70 kilometres away to seek a regular GP, let alone accessing allied health. And, up until probably just before COVID hit, we didn't see a lot of visiting allied health workers come to Gunnedah from private companies, whereas now there is a greater range. But it doesn't help if you're needing the ongoing treatment and support of someone while you're dealing with chronic pain. And I think that starts with the GP and the fact that a lot of people are seeing locums, and, the doctor they see this month for a visit is not who they're going to see next month. So they don't get that continuity of care from the get-go of, I understand chronic pain, I know where I can access services or refer you. And, that's devastating for people. And when you're crying out for help because you've got that pain and you can't get it under control, people will turn to the emergency department and get that. And I know I've had it myself, the roll of the eyes of staff, the look that, she says she's got pain, but, look at her lying there. She's not really, she's not crying out in pain. She's not rolling all over the bed. But, that's how I deal with my pain, is to lay still. But, I think, people are just I think sometimes go to emergency departments, they just are calling out for help and they don't know where to turn. So that's their last resort. And, it's the same with accessing. You start looking at distance to get a referral to a pain clinic. You're looking at then the addition of distance and needing accommodation and cost of fuel and all those extra expenses that maybe, driving a couple of suburbs over, or, a trip you can do in a day is not accessible from here. And I've been very fortunate to be under the care of a pain team for 30 years, and I appreciate that. And they've been there for me when, I haven't had a GP, and I've been able to contact them to help me get through a situation. But for those who don't, it's very frightening. And I think that leads into, the social isolation. If you're living on a farm that is, again, 50 kilometres out of town and you've got chronic pain, or, there's no one else on the farm to help. And I think, farmers have always been, looked upon as being a stoic group of men that, we can manage that, if something falls off the tractor, we just fix it. We don't need to, and that's how they look at their own health. And, and so acknowledging that you've got chronic pain is one thing, and then to be willing to reach out for help is another thing. And when there's that lack of services, it only adds to the difficulties and, who do I turn to? And that's, and I too can relate to Piero with the, not wanting to get out of bed, not wanting to open my eyes because it means it's another day. And what do I do today? Or, I'll use the example that recently, with my battle for recognition of workers' compensation, it just got to a point where I found myself sitting on the kitchen floor crying because it was just one email, one too many over this matter that I just wanted resolved. And, you know, and up until, you know, this point, I've been like others and had to pay for my health visits and, you know, there's limited access to public services. Private services, you've got the added expense, and it comes down to, well, what do I do? Do I go to the physio, or do I go to the exercise physiologist? Who's helping more? Or, you know, I've had to turn to my mother and, you know, had some financial assistance there because, you know, there's only so much annual leave you could live on and long service leave. So it's, you know, it's been such a battle. I think, you know, the last 3 years have probably been harder than dealing with the previous 30 years. And it's a lonely battle at times. And, you know, and I do have good days and I appreciate them. And it's not all doom and gloom. So please don't think I'm sitting here as the representative of the doom. You know, I, you know, find my way out, you know, get in the sunshine and, you know, something positive. And I've got a small group of friends who support me. But, you know, I've also, like Piero's talked about, you know, loss of identity. You know, I've gone from working in the health system and thinking that I would finish my career doing this. And now that's gone. So, you know, what do I do now to fill that void? And it's, you know, and I just think, you know, social interaction is very important. But again, it's when you're in a small community, it's finding how to interact with others when there's limited groups or things that are going on. So, you know, that's I think another added issue for those of us in smaller communities and rural communities. So that's probably my case in a nutshell, Brent.
There's a lot to unpack there, Liz. Look, thank you again. It's similar to Piero, like you guys sharing these insights, these personal stories. It's just incredibly powerful. Yeah, I think, you know, as part of the preparation for this discussion, I think you made the point that sometimes you feel like you're the only person in your local community who feels like they have chronic pain, and, you know, that judgment, that isolation, the stigma associated with it. I'm sure there are people listening today that feel as though they're in a very similar position. So, yeah, well, I think you've touched on a lot of key points there. We're going to talk a little bit about that loss of identity. But more importantly, I think, you know, again, today is about hope, validation and support. And you've certainly shared some strategies there that you're using to support yourself. We really want to sort of shift or zero in, I guess. We've had a couple of questions coming through on the chat around opioid use. What's your experience of opioid use when it comes to chronic pain management look like? And we'll also sort of begin to bring Fiona and Nicolette into the discussion out the back of this question. But yeah, before I throw to them, would you care to share anything in that space?
Yeah, sure, Brent. My opioid usage or treatment plan is long. You know, I think a lot of people, and even still today, one of the first treatments that some GPs will try is opioids, but I go back to when opioids seems to be the key treatment and trialling different ones. So, and I think I ended up on a rather large cocktail of dosage of the opioids. And I can remember a helpful GP who was very supportive saying to me that, you know, he felt that with the dose I was on, I should have probably been in an intensive care unit hooked up to a ventilator. But, you know, I was walking around and you know, trying to work. So, you know, and I remember the first time I saw my pain specialist and the mention of introducing a multidisciplinary team approach and moving away from the use of opioids. And I thought, oh, you know, you've got to be joking. I can't do that. I'm talking to you here in a metropolitan area. I'm going back 4 hours away to an area that I'm lucky to have a GP and that's it. And I've got to try and do this. And it scared the living daylights out of me, to be quite honest. But with the aid of the team I've got, you know, we just have worked very slowly at reducing my dosage. There has been no set timeframes for there's been goals, as in, we hope to reduce the dose by June. But, if we don't get there, or we get halfway there or a third of the way there, then that's still, great. Then, we start the next point from that point, which I think is important for people to know, that they can do it in their, with the work of team, that, you can do it in a slower time frame. There is no set, I have to be off it, because, I probably would have been curled up in a ball on the bed, like Piero, because it's scary. And I still have good days and bad days even with it. And I was fortunate that over it probably took me 3 years to get from where I was to the minimal. And at that point, when we felt really good about what I'd achieved, we were here. And that's when my back injury come in. So, yes, we reintroduced some, nothing like what I'd been on before, which is it is a goal and a success. But, we are working on reducing it. And, but again, it's a slow trip, and, no one's pushing me to get off it. And that's, I think, what helps my mindset with dealing with tapering of opioids, is knowing that, if I go, the GP's not going to sit there and say, well, today's the day, we've got to kick thee off that. It's, well, let's try this way instead. So, I'm very fortunate there.
Terrific. Thank you very much for sharing. It's probably a good time for us to welcome both Fiona Hodson and Nicolette Ellis to this discussion. Not only are both of you guys President and Vice President of Chronic Pain Australia, but you have over 40 combined years of professional experience in pain management at clinical level. Nicolette, I know that we're really keen to sort of dive in on a few areas here. I'm sure you're very appreciative of the personal insights that our lived experience panelists have shared to this point, and it's been an incredible National Pain Week. Let's start with you, I guess, as a clinical pharmacist and as the current president. Can you provide any insights into the medical perspective of the increased use of alcohol, chronic pain community, especially when it comes to, I guess some of the themes around reduced access to opioids?
Yeah, I think we've been doing a huge amount of media to try and get the voices of the 3.6 million Australians who live with chronic pain. And Piero and Liz's stories are, really important to share, because we can have those statistics that we share in the National Pain Survey, but sometimes it dehumanizes those stories. And this is what today is all about, is celebrating the stories of Liz and Piero. And they have very different stories, and everyone has a different story who lives with chronic pain. And celebrating, be loud about this is really important to sort of change the hearts and minds of Australians, community, so that we don't see this stigma, this addiction mentality, these difficult, a lot of my health professional colleagues might call chronic pain people difficult. And that's, a lot of the time it's about changing health professionals' minds around what chronic pain is actually doing to drive, maybe unhelpful behaviours like Ange was talking about. And you can see from just Piero and Liz's stories where, they don't just have pain, they've got family, they've got social, they've got work, then chuck in workers' compensation is the worst combination. And they're reaching out in, different ways to try and help improve, what is happening in their lives. So you can really see how that vicious cycle just starts and spirals out of control for many Australians out there. And just to touch on opioids as well, we've developed a resource as well, because we know that this is such a difficult and challenging situation for many Australians who have been prescribed opioids long term. I think Piero and Liz's stories are very different and unique. Someone's been escalating opioids because of pain. Another one is trying to reduce, but having the support of their health professionals. And there's all different types of stories. And unfortunately, enforced opioid tapering is one of them that continues to come out as a theme within the National Pain Survey. So again, 1 in 5 of the respondents said that they experienced enforced opioid tapering. I can go through the resource if you like, Brent.
Yeah, look, I think that's a good, that's a great place, because that was essentially going to be one of the questions, was around what resources or strategies could those in that situation employ?
Yeah, absolutely. So the resource that we've developed, it's a bit more so you could take it to your GP if you are having these conversations around tapering or enforcing opioids. I think some of the health profession are not across, the risks of enforced opioid tapering, and there's no therapy, and reducing a therapy should be a decision between you and the GP. It should never be enforced. So, I wouldn't go to Brent and say, you must have this surgery. It's Brent's decision. It's the same sort of scenario. So if someone is trying to enforce opioids tapering and it's non-consensual, it's really important to sort of point out, I guess, the evidence in a respectful way to the GPs, because we know it causes more harm to people. Having something done to you that you don't consent to is obviously something that's going to cause harm to someone. So we've got some steps around, if you do agree to tapering, it's not about getting off the opioids. I think that's something that the health profession really needs to get in their mind. The goal is not reducing all opioids, because it just might not be possible. And I think of a client that I worked with. He was on a huge dose of morphine, 800 milligrams a day. That's more than what you'd probably get in palliative care. And it was over a 2-year period, got down to 50 milligrams of morphine twice a day. And then we tried one more time to step down, and his function, quality of life reduced. So we went back to the original dose he was stable and doing well on. And that is perfectly appropriate in that scenario. Why would we keep pushing to reduce? And like going from 800 to 100 milligrams of oral morphine equivalent is an exceptional goal, exceptional outcome, improved his safety, improved the side effects of what those medications were doing as well. Determining the pace of reduction is really important. And I think this should be, like in Liz's story, supported by your health professional. So you have regular touch points with them. They ask how you're going, how your function, quality of life is going. And you both make the decision, should we step down again? It shouldn't be this every 2 weeks we're stepping down over this period of time. And then there should be an ability, like with that gentleman that I was talking about, to return to the previous effective dose for that person. I think it's really important to call out as well naloxone, which is a medication that's available over the counter, that anyone who's taking strong opioids or pain relieving medicines should be prescribed this. And what naloxone does is it reverses if you have too much of the opioid or you had it in combination with other medications or alcohol. It reverses opioid toxicity, and it's a life-saving drug. So if you think about it like you have anaphylaxis, you have an EpiPen. It's there to save you and rescue you. And so there's some links there to naloxone. You can get it over the counter from your pharmacist, and you don't have to pay for it as well. Important thing to add there. If your doctor is approaching you about reducing opioids, I think it's also important to know that there's alternatives. So there is a strategy that we call opioid rotation. So we're actually rotating from one opioid molecule to another opioid molecule. And not all opioids are the same. They work in different ways. And when we do rotate, we can reduce the total morphine that you're taking, which reduces side effects, but it also improves analgesia because you're introducing a new molecule to the system that it's not used to. So opioids inevitably cause tolerance, and we see this within 1 month to 3 months of treatment and therapy. That's just a blanket rule. Everyone is different, and it takes someone to come in and review and manage and assess that appropriately. There's also another type for people who I've worked with who want to come off opioids very rapidly. It's not something that I usually recommend, and we need to do this in conjunction with an addiction medicine specialist. But there are people who are maybe experiencing side effects from the medication. You can't just, you can go cold turkey, but it's an awful experience and not something that I wish on anyone. And then there's other people who are just sick of the medication and their goal is to come off it and they want to come off it rapidly. So there is a type of opioid called buprenorphine. It's got a really unique way that it works. And what it does is it basically unhooks the other opioids on the opioid receptor. But it also prevents you from getting those really nasty withdrawal symptoms. And if you do want to reduce those opioids in a quick time frame, we can usually do that within 2 to 4 to 6 weeks, and you'd be monitored over that period of time. Most people come off that medication altogether, and it's just another option that you can talk about with your health professionals. There's a communication tool that I really like called BRAN, which means benefits, risks, alternatives, and nothing. So talking with your GP or your pharmacist, what's the benefits of me doing an opioid taper compared to maybe an opioid rotation or a rapid withdrawal? What's the risks of doing this? Do I have some alternatives? And then a really important question is, what if we just do nothing? Is it better for me just to stay on current treatment and we revisit this in 6 months? So these kind of strategies hopefully just help people navigate that conversation and have a document that they can show to their GP of, maybe some alternatives or some different thoughts, and give them some perspective of, what enforced opioid tapering is actually doing to our community.
That's incredible detail, Nick, and the resource you're referring to will be available to the audience through the Facebook page and up on our website out the back of this discussion. That's something which we're quite keen to get in everyone's hands. So look, there's a couple of questions that have come through on the chat which are very relevant to the themes that you've just sort of discussed. But I might actually just take this opportunity to introduce Fiona, who's been so patient. Fiona Hodson is the former president of Chronic Pain Australia, but someone who's specialised in pain management as a clinical nurse consultant for over 25 years. Fiona, you've seen the landscape change quite a bit over your journey, especially, I guess in context of the recent findings of the National Pain Survey. What does the landscape look like out there at the moment?
It is very different, and as I said, I've been 25 years in this space, and I think what the National Pain Survey has showed over we've been doing it for about 9 years now, is that unfortunately stigma that people are feeling in the community is still very prevalent. I think what has actually happened is that the survey has showed us also that people are feeling much more stigmatised by their health professionals, which is disappointing. So I'm hoping that the survey, that we can get that message out there to people, that this is how people are feeling. I think particularly in the opioid landscape, with the new legislation changes, we've seen a huge shift in I think that stigma has been as a result of that as well. And this forced tapering where people, there is no decision makings. And I think legislation has really changed that scene. And there's a lot of GPs out there that are just refusing to even prescribe any opioids. So therefore people are going there to their GPs and feeling like, they can't get anything. So I think they're the main things I've seen clinically. So it's very validating. Like I see it where we have, multiple referrals for people, just, like 10 referrals from one clinic where that clinic has decided not to prescribe anymore. So I think that's probably the biggest things. And also now having the ability to ask those sensitive questions around mental health and the suicide ideation and what these issues have been to the individuals and their families, the impact that it's had on their families as well. And I think what I've also seen is the shift now where we might be trying to reduce opioids, but what has been happening is there's been a replacement of other prescribed medications, which can be just as sedative or problematic, such as antidepressants, sedatives to make people sleep and that sort of stuff, and also people's increased use in other more unhelpful substances. So that's probably clinically what I've been seeing. And as I said, what the National Pain Survey has actually allowed us that ability to get the message out and promote that to not just to other health professionals and community, but also help try and get that message to government that this is what's actually happening at the coalface.
That's terrific. And there's a couple of questions here I'm going to sort of morph into one. They're very much around, I guess, looking at the level of training or the type of training that allied health professionals are receiving, symptom versus cause, difference between primary and secondary pain. Is that shifting?
I think it is. There's going to be, and Chronic Pain Australia has been involved in a national project which is around which there was a co-design component around consumers inputting into what they felt was important for all health professionals in pain management. So at the moment, it's in about going to about a pilot stage, but I think previously there has been less pain education in undergraduate programs, and I think in medicine, I think someone told me and quoted me that a veterinarian gets 7 times more pain management hours than a normal doctor does or a GP in their training. So hopefully that will change. And again, with this sort of people with the lived experience, this is what we're hoping to get that message out to people. This is why it is so important to ensure that we are covering this. So hopefully it's a shifting space.
Thanks, Fiona. Look, we're sort of at the very back end of the discussion now. We're going to open it up a little bit. I'm interested, Nick, just quickly to return to you. I wanted to just sort of question without notice here, but you've been doing a lot of media work this week. What are some of the media sentiment in regards to the findings of the National Pain Survey? What are some of those key threads that are really starting to get some traction?
Yeah, I think people are really shocked about the suicide ideation statistic that we put out, 1 in 2. Unfortunately, I think most people who volunteer for CPA weren't shocked about it. So I think it's a really strong but awful statistic to talk about, but it's one that's so important because hopefully it's conveying a message to the general community of, this is a chronic condition. People are in desperate need of help and support services, quality pain management and health professionals who know what they're doing in this space. And there's clear gaps in what's being delivered for people who live with pain in Australia at the moment. The other part that is quite shocking is, in 2018, we knew that chronic pain cost $80 billion to the economy. And there's 2.5 million that was invested by the government. And Ange, I thought, said this really well in a radio interview. If you had a business and something was costing you $80,000 and you decided to put in $2.50 to try and fix it, what could you achieve, really? So we've really got to communicate very clearly what's happening to our community and use really powerful stories like Piero's and Liz to, I think, hopefully get the impact across. I know it's an invisible condition, but it's really frustrating that people can't understand the experience of living with chronic pain. Everyone's experienced pain on some level during their life, and it might have just been acute, but could you imagine doing that every day? Like, it should really shake some people out of this sort of coma that we're in at the moment.
Absolutely. I'm keen to return before we finish up to both Piero and Liz in particular, in terms of anything else they'd like to add to the discussion, anything they've heard, from Nick and Fiona that you guys would like to add.
Well, I think myself, Brent, I think what Liz touched on before, I think sometimes the added pressure on myself personally was because I wasn't working, I started to feel that I'm being labelled as, you know, and she's so right. You go to the doctors and you feel guilty. The added pressure, you're talking to your insurance company, all that sort of stuff. You start to feel that, you just don't feel. I feel guilty for some reason, and I don't know why. That's just the perception that I get. You know, I feel that I'm, you know, that people think that you're lying sometimes about your pain and stuff like that. And that really puts added pressure onto your emotions and the way you feel, and really brings you down, you know. And again, it's one of the reasons why you just want to hide. You know, you just don't feel that people are taking you seriously enough, you know. And like I said, I'm very grateful and happy all the support that I've had. But sometimes I just feel from a professional level, you're just not treated the way we should be treated.
That feeling of isolation, I know that a lot of people, myself included, you know, from a lived experience perspective, feel that. Liz, is that something that you wanted to sort of add to?
Oh, definitely. It is that sense of isolation and not being, the feeling of not being believed. And as Nick said, you know, I think I had endometriosis, and, you know, and no one can see that because it's on the inside and that. And what I have found is now I shouldn't say I get around. I now rely on the use of a walking stick when, going out in public. And, you know, it's like, you know, because you've got that golden tool with you, yes, there's something wrong with you. Yes, there's definitely an issue. And it shouldn't be like that. It should be that I can say, I've got pain, it's not a good pain day. And that person, whether they be a health professional or an organisation or the person down the street, will just go, well, you know, that's not good to hear. Is there anything I can do to help? What can we focus on today that might help improve it? And sometimes I think just having those words said, that someone's acknowledging it as being real, helps to build your spirit up, or at least start building that spirit back up. Because, you know, I think of my travels as being like going along hills. You know, you have your good days, you have your bad days. So it's up, down, and you know, and so it's acknowledging it, and, you know, and that, and I just want people, you know, I sort of feel that I just want people to know, like you said earlier, I feel like I'm the only person in my town that has it because it's not spoken about. But, you know, I'd love anyone else in the area, you know, to feel that they could speak to me about it if they're feeling the same way. So I really, you know, get strongly, you know, be brave and speak up.
It's conversations like this, well, I guess we've had today, that really do have the power to change lives. So thanks, Liz, and I completely agree. And I guess I'll just use this opportunity to acknowledge the contributions of everyone that's contributed today. There is an opportunity for any closing remarks if anyone wants to make one final point. Otherwise, we'll look to wrap this up.
Brett, it's Fiona here. I just wanted to promote the Australian Pain Management Association's PainLink support line. I think you mentioned it before. That's a good way to connect with people who have, you know, mental health first aid training, but also have had the lived experience. So, and they can also put you in touch, like Liz might, you not know that there's a local group in an area near her. So they also run support groups. So I think connection, that would best be my parting point.
Thanks, Fiona. Terrific. And also, I mean, the other thing too is the Chronic Pain Australia website is a terrific resource. This podcast alone is part of a series. So for those interested in listening to previous episodes, you can check them out through Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We've obviously got our pain forum as well. Fiona, Nick, anything you'd like to add?
Oh, there's lots of love for Piero and Liz in the comments for sharing their stories. And I think that just speaks to what the importance of this conversation was about. There's some questions around, are we targeting these resources to health professionals? First and foremost, we try and help empower consumers with lived experience of chronic pain. But we do have strong relationships with the Faculty of Pain Medicine and RACGP, and this is something that we are trying to address with them with education. I've been doing it in the pharmacy world because that's my profession for a number of years, and I continue to do that. So it is something that's certainly on Chronic Pain Australia's radar. We are a solely volunteer organisation. I'm losing my voice because it's National Pain Week. And if you do want to volunteer and help, we need people power. So please reach out to us, even if you just want to connect in and talk with people like Piero and Liz and other people who also volunteer for CPA.
Absolutely. So thanks to everyone. Incredible insights, terrific discussion, and thanks to the audience for joining us, whether that's live or through this recording. So let's get the conversation going and supporting each other and take care. All the best.